Hello everyone, this is Dr. Sudha and you are watching another video on Biology with Dr. Sudha. Today we are continuing with our chapter that is reproduction in flower. In our previous videos, as we have discussed microsporogenesis, megasporogenesis, and we are moving further to the topic pollination, right? What we have done, let's have a brief revision of that. Till now we have seen the structure of flower. I am considering here a bisexual flower which we have done. Bisexual flower has its female reproductive part, that is stigma, style and ovary, and male reproductive part, that is anthers and filament together constitute stamen. Okay? The stamen is the male reproductive part and pistil is the female reproductive part. We have seen that when we have taken a cross section of anther, we have seen the structure somewhat like this, right? In this structure, in this anther, there were 4 microsporangium and its cells, that is sporogenous tissue, they had given rise to microspores, and we have done the detailed structure of this anther wall. That anther wall is consisting of 4 layers. What were those 4 layers? 4 layers. First was epithelium, middle layer, endothecium, and then tapetum. And we have seen that microspores had changed into pollen grains, and pollen grains were released from this point of dehiscence. These microsporangium also called pollen sacs. तो हमने ये भी देखा था कि जब when the pollen grains were released, most of the angiosperms, pollen grains are released at 2 cell stage. ये हमने किया था. What was there? One bigger cell and one smaller cell. Bigger cell was called the vegetative cell or the tube cell, और इसको हमने बोलते हैं generative cell. और there were having the membrane, that is internal membrane, and another membrane, that is exine. Exine was the outer membrane which was made up of sporopollenin. So, this was the structure of pollen grain. By the time in this our pistil part, that is in ovary, we have done the detailed structure of anatropous, typical anatropous ovule, and in this ovule हमने ये भी देखा था क्या हुआ था, pollen sac was formed, pollen sac नहीं, it was embryo sac. Now pollen grain is known as male gametophyte as it will give rise to male gametes, right? और जो embryo sac बना था, it was having egg, synergids, 2 polar nuclei, 3 antipodal cell. That was the typical polygonum type of embryo sac, which was how many nuclei? 8 nuclei and 7 cell structure it was. And this embryo sac is also known as female gametophyte. What I mean to say now, that gametes are ready for reproduction. Male gametes are ready, female gamete, that is egg, is ready. Now our next step is that these pollen grains have to land on this stigma so that fertilization can take place, and this male gametes in this pollen grain, they can reach up to the female gamete so that they can result in the formation of zygote by the process of fertilization. Now today's our topic is transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower, that is known as pollination. So let us start with that. I hope till microsporogenesis and megasporogenesis there is no doubt. If there is any doubt, you can ask me in the comment section, right? Okay. Now what is pollination? Pollination का मतलब है transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma of flower. This process is known as pollination. to stigma of flower. Now this flower can be, means this anther or stigma can be present on the same flower, that can be present on the different flower, and even that can be present on the different plants. On the basis of that, we can divide pollination into two types. Pollination is of two types, that is self-pollination and number two is cross-pollination. Right? Now, self-pollination can be autogamy or it can be geitonogamy. And cross-pollination is also known as allogamy or genogamy. Right? Okay. Now, suppose this is one plant, right, and it has, let me make a flower. This is not the flower structure, but understanding I am making like this. This is a flower and it has its pistil part, and this is anther, and these are its petals, right? Now, pollen grains are released from this anther and they are transferred by their own, अपने आप ही वो ट्रांसफ़र हो जाती हैं किस पे? Stigma of the same flower. Now this flower is bisexual flower. This is bisexual flower. Bisexual flower means it's having male and female reproductive parts on the same flower. So they require no agency and there is no change in the genetic material, as the pollen grains of the same flower are transferred to the stigma of the same flower, right? Both the parts are present on one flower. So there is no genetic changes, no variation, nothing will happen, only just the pollen grains they will carry to the stigma and they will fertilize and the plant or flower of the same kind will be formed. This process is known as autogamy, right? Okay. Now what is geitonogamy? Suppose I have this plant have one flower here, one flower, stigma, style, ovary. Suppose this is only the female reproductive part is here, that is it is the female flower. Female flower matlab flower is unisexual, okay, and in this plant here are present only the male part, thalamus, and only male part is present, right? Anthers and stem, that is stamen, are present. This is the male plant. Okay? It can be possible plant is bisexual because it is bearing both kinds of flower, male flower as well as female flower, but the flower itself is unisexual. It's bearing only one part, either male or female, right? But they are present on the same plant. They are present on the same plant. Now, if the pollen grains are released from this anther and they are transferred to this stigma of another flower but on the same plant, right? If pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma of the another flower but on the same plant, that process is known as geitonogamy. Now see, ये जो pollen grains हैं which are released from these anthers, can they travel by their own to this flower? pollen grains के कोई वो तो है नहीं कि हाथ पैर कुछ है तो वो अपने आप जाके यहाँ पे जाके पहुँच जाएंगी, ठीक है. They have to travel through some agency. कोई ना कोई एजेंसी आती है. एजेंसी मतलब there can be some animal, there can be water, there can be air, means some factors are responsible for transferring these pollen grains from anthers to stigma. So it requires some agency. This thing is similar to cross pollination, right? So geitonogamy, let me rub it from here. So geitonogamy, it is functionally it is similar to cross pollination. Functionally it is similar to cross pollination, right? But is there any change in the genetic material? As both the flowers on the same plant, so there is no change in the genetic material. So if there is no change in the genetic material, it is similar to autogamy, that is self-pollination. But geitonogamy is also the type of self-pollination as it is occurring on the flowers of the same plant. All the flowers are different. So functionally, and it requires some agency for the transfer, that is why it is functionally cross-pollination, but genetically it is similar to autogamy, right? I think you must have understood that what is self-pollination, right? Okay. Now, let us start with the cross-pollination. Cross-pollination means transfer of pollen grains from anthers of flower of one plant to stigma of another plant. What I want to say is, मान लो यहाँ पे 2 plants हैं हमारे पास, एक plant यहाँ है और एक plant at some far distance, बहुत दूर है ये, ठीक है. Suppose this plant, it's having its, for example, let me make it male reproductive part, ठीक है, male flower है, anthers, and this plant, its female reproductive part is here, ठीक है. This is the female flower, plant can be unisexual, this is the female plant, this is the male plant, right? Now, when the pollen grains are released, they have to travel to this stigma of that flower which is in the different plant, and these plants are lying at a far distance, दूर दूर हैं वो plant, but of the same species, right? So this process requires some agency. ये ट्रांसफ़र करने के लिए, pollen grains को एंथर से ट्रांसफ़र करने के लिए, कहाँ पर, स्टिग्मा के ऊपर, दूसरे प्लांट पे, कहीं दूर पे जगह पे जो प्लांट है, उसके लिए हमें क्या चाहिए, कोई ना कोई एजेंसी चाहिए, ठीक है. एजेंसी दैट कैन बी बायोटिक फैक्टर, दैट कैन बी एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स. सो दिस प्रोसेस ऑफ ट्रांसफर ऑफ pollen grains फ्रॉम एंथर टू स्टिग्मा ऑफ डिफरेंट प्लांट्स is known as cross pollination. And as the plants are different, so there will be variation, genetic makeup will be changing, and this cross pollination, इसका दूसरा नाम हम दे सकते हैं जीनोगेमी और एलोगेमी. Now let us see what are those factors which are responsible for this cross pollination. So I think, let me tell you that what are the pollinating factors. Pollinating agencies बोल दो, factors बोल दो, ठीक है. They can be biotic factors and there can be abiotic factors, right? Biotic means something through living agents, and here something non-living agents, right? Okay. So biotic factors can be, you can say, some animals, various ways are there, various biotic factors are involved for this pollination, and abiotic factors can be water and it can be air. But बायोटिक फैक्टर्स आर प्रेफर्ड ओवर एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स। नेचर जो है हमेशा बायोटिक फैक्टर्स को प्रेफर करती है बजाय एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स के। क्यों? क्योंकि एबायोटिक फैक्टर तो ये है कि देयर इज़ अ चांस ऑफ रिस्क है इसके साथ। एबायोटिक फैक्टर हवा हो सकता है इस डायरेक्शन में चल रही है, हो सकता है उससे उल्टी डायरेक्शन में चल रही है। वाटर के साथ भी क्या है, कोई भी श्योरिटी नहीं है, ठीक है। एंड बायोटिक फैक्टर में देर आर लिविंग समथिंग लिविंग, तो इनके अंदर कुछ ना कुछ सेंस है। एंड देन दैट इज अ मतलब श्योर फैक्टर दैट पॉलिनेशन विल अकर थ्रू दिस बायोटिक फैक्टर एज दिस इज इन्वॉल्विंग द लिविंग और एनिमल्स, तो दे आर हैविंग सम सेंस। तो चांस फैक्टर ऑफ नॉट पॉलिनेटिंग, मतलब पॉलिनेशन नहीं हो, इसका चांस भी जुड़ा, रिस्क फैक्टर जो है वो एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स के साथ ज़्यादा है बजाय बायोटिक फैक्टर्स की। और अगर हम एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स की बात करें तो उसमें भी क्या है, या तो वाटर या एयर का प्रेफरेंस। आप बताइए दोनों में से किसका ज़्यादा नेचर प्रेफर करेगी? नेचर विल प्रेफर, इन दोनों में से एयर को ज़्यादा प्रेफर करेगी। क्यों? क्योंकि हवा तो चल रही है और उड़ के उसके साथ पॉलन ग्रेन्स अपनी जगह से ट्रांसफ़र हो ही जाएंगे, बट वाटर के अंदर देर आर वेरी लिमिटेड स्पीशीज विच आर पॉलिनेटिंग थ्रू वाटर ओनली। टोटल जो प्लांट जेनरा के ओनली 30 जेनराज आर पॉलिनेटिंग बाय वाटर, ठीक है। तो ये क्वेश्चन आ जाता है, बायोटिक फैक्टर्स आर प्रेफर्ड ओवर एबायोटिक, और अगर हम एबायोटिक फैक्टर्स के प्रेफरेंस की बात करें तो एयर इज प्रेफर्ड मोर देन वाटर, राइट। ओके, नाउ अब इस चांस फैक्टर को कंपनसेट करने के लिए, प्लांट क्या करते हैं, पोलन ग्रेन्स बहुत ज़्यादा लार्ज अमाउंट में रिलीज़ करवाते हैं, ताकि अगर कुछ पोलन ग्रेन्स रास्ते में ख़राब भी हो जाएं, डिस्ट्रॉय हो जाए ड्यू टू एनी रीज़न, तो they can be compensated by the large number. If suppose there are million of number, then only some hundreds can be reached on the stigma, ठीक है। तो अगर कुछ खराब हो भी गई तो कुछ तो पहुंचेंगी ना, ठीक है। तो दैट्स वे द to cover this chance factor, pollen grains are released in large number. And I think till now there is no confusion, very simple process. Let me revise. What is pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower. Flower can be same flower, anthers and stigma can be of same flower, then this is known as self-pollination. And if the flowers are different but on the same plant, then that self-pollination is known as geitonogamy. Otherwise, its name is autogamy. Auto means self, right? And if the pollen grains are transferred from anthers of flower of one plant to stigma of flower of another different plant which is lying at some distance, then that process of pollination, that type of pollination is known as cross pollination. And cross pollination always involves some pollinating agencies. कौन से agencies? Biotic means living factors and abiotic means some non-living factors. And that geitonogamy in self-pollination, that is very important thing, that geitonogamy resembles cross-pollination functionally because it also requires some agency for the transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma of different flower but on the same plant, right? And genetically it is similar to self-pollination. So with this we will continue in our next video. Till then, bye bye, keep watching and happy watching.